Who would have thought that sunflower maidens and deep sea undead zombies were a match made in heavens? And on top of that, we've got mythical creatures. Yeah, from an outside perspective, the nation Stoicheia looks to be a complete mess. But it's a beautiful mess. Stand up! Vanguard! Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another set review, and today we're gonna cover the 4th nation of the Genesis of the 5 Grades booster set, as we're gonna tackle Stoicheia. And Stoicheia is one of those very interesting nations because it's the nation where two old nations were fused together, and I'm of course talking about Magnolia with Grand Blue and Aquaforce, and then the Zoo clans with Megacolony, Neonectar, and Great Nature. And the result of that is a very interesting nation with a lot of different aesthetics and very unique playstyles. And that is what we're going to cover today, as we're going to see the new Zorga playstyle with the whole aspect around order cards, as well as the resurrecting abilities that we've seen in Grand Blue. And then on top of that, we see the new Magnolia Great Nature beast, or we could at least say it's inspired by Great Nature. That's all around the multi-tacking and the inclusion with Persona Right. But before we dive into the set review itself, if any of these cards that we're going to tackle in today's video tickle your fancy, then head over to parkage.com to grab yourself some products for the upcoming overdress era. And of course, use the discount code TIMELEAP5 to get 5% off your entire order that you're purchasing with this code. But with that section out of the way, let's jump straight into these cards. And just like any other set review, we're going to tackle the triggers first. And just like the other nation, Stoicheia got a total of 8 triggers, but 7 of those are going to get 3 stars, which are of course the 2 draws, the 2 crits, the 2 fronts, and 1 of the heals that were included in the starter deck. But they got a second heal in the set, which is Fairy of Elegy. And Fairy of Elegy, sadly, is going to be a 1-star. Yes, it's a waifu for some, but there's no actual reason for this heal trigger to exist outside of the art itself. So sadly, it's gonna be a 1-star, but if this art fancy you more, then sure, go ahead. Then next in line, we've got the starters, and the starter from the starter deck is Sylvan Horned Beast Lot, which has the generic starter ability Auto. When this unit is rode upon, if you win second, draw a card. And just like all the other starters, it's going to be a 3-star, as it's just generically fine. But then followed up on that one, we've got the starter from the set itself for the whole Zorga archetype, which is Dream Gnawing. And this one is sadly going to be a 1-star, as there's no actual reason to play this over the other, as there's the same unit, only a different artwork. Now next up, we've got another card that you probably all know about, and my opinion about that, as we've got the vanilla card, which is Seizing / Mutant Brew Slash, and it's a vanilla card. It's a 1-star. No redeeming quality here. Then moving on, we've got the PGs, and for Stoicheia, we've got the PG from the starter deck, which is Hopeful Maiden Alejandra. And Alejandra has the generic PG ability, so it's gonna be a 3-star, as it's fine for what it is, but sadly nothing special on top of that. But the next PG does have that, which is Planar Prevent Dragon, which of course has the new 1/0 discard ability that is auto. When this unit is put on the Guardian Circle, choose one of your units and it cannot be hit until the end of battle. If your hand has 2 or more cards, choose a card from your hand and discard it. AKA, if you have 1 or less cards in hand, you don't have to discard when using this PG. Just like all the other ones that have this skill, it's gonna be a 4-star. It's a nice addition to the PG lineup. It will come up sometimes from time to time, but not always, so it's not as universal applicable like the draw PGs that we had in the V series, but still a very nice new addition for the PGs to have. Now, rounding up all the generic support before we dive into the actual cards with skills, we have the Overtrigger for Stoicheia. And this is the longest Overtrigger ability that we've seen, because the Overtrigger for Stoicheia is Source Dragon, Deity of Blessings, Blessed Favor. And its additional effect reads as follows: draw a card, choose one of your units, it gets critical +1 until the end of turn. All of your front row units get power plus 10k. If your damage zone has more cards than your opponent's, choose a card from your damage zone and heal it. So basically what this is, it's a draw trigger, a front trigger, a critical trigger, and a heal trigger in one. Now, it isn't as clear on this wording, but the front trigger power, the plus 10k to the front row, is also until the end of turn. The only thing that's different here is that the heal aspect of this card isn't similar to the normal heals, because you need to have more cards in your damage zone, so you need to have more damage in order to heal, whereas normal heals also will activate if you're equal. Now overall, this is going to be a 4-star overtrigger for me, because this is an overtrigger that will always be useful in every single situation. Of course, during certain scenarios it's going to be much better, as you can get beneficial effects from everything or from more aspects. But no matter the circumstances, you will get some value out of it. At the very least, it's a crit trigger and a draw trigger, so you're gonna get that out of it in the early game. And maybe you got damage when you was rushed by your opponent, and it's also a heal that activates on turn 2 or something like that. So it's a very versatile overtrigger that can give you a lot of value. Sure, it won't win you games immediately like some other overtriggers do, but at the very least, it's an overtrigger that will always be nice to see no matter when it happens. So therefore, I think it's a solid 4-star card. It's definitely way better than the Cray Elemental one that just gives 2 100 million power stacks to the board, whereas this gives 100 million power stacks, a 10k to the front row, another crit, another draw, and as well as a potential heal, which is... it's not bad. But that said, let's actually dive into the cards with skills. And we're gonna start off with the chunk of cards that are just generic support cards. And just like all the other nations, we've got a grade 1 with a 10k boost application. Because we have Gloomy Tour with the ability, on a Wriggles circle, when this unit boosts, this unit gets power plus 2k until the end of turn. Now this is going to be, for me, sadly, a 1-star. And yes, you might think, why is this a 1-star, whereas at least the others were 2-stars, or in some cases for Dragon Empire 3-star. It's because, just like all the other ones, it's not really useful, as they are, as seen as the nation already got other cards that can be 10k boosters that are way more useful for their respective archetype. But at the same time, there's even less reason to run this in this particular nation, because the Alchemagic deck has like no room to run useless cards with cards that they cannot benefit from. And in Magnolia's case, there's yet another reason to not play this card, because you probably want to have back row units that can attack, and as soon as this has a boost skill, and there is a high chance that you're not even using it as a booster, makes it even less useful. So currently I don't really see any application for this grade 1, so that's why it's gonna be a 1-star. But next up we've got another grade 1, which is actually a bit more useful, which is Collusion Mutant Admantis. And Admantis has the ability, auto, when this unit is placed on a Wriggles circle, choose one of your other Wriggles and it gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. Now for me this is gonna be a 2-star, like, it's nice, you can give 5k power to a unit, so you can maybe create a bit better columns, but overall it's not the most amazing card, and it will definitely be removed or power creeped out of the deck with maybe with the next set already. So I cannot give it 3 stars, it's just 5k power, it's not that much. Now another grade 1 that we've got is Knight of Friendship Charis, and Charis has the ability, act on Wriggles circle, once a turn, cost Soul Blast 2, reveal the top card of your deck. If it's a unit card, call to the Wriggles circle, and if it isn't, put it into your hand. So this is basically a Soul Blast 2 to gain 1 card advantage, which can be a unit on the field, otherwise an order card in your hand. For me, it's gonna be a 1-star, and the reason for it is that Soul Blast 2 is kind of heavy, but it isn't Soul Blast 2 to draw a card, because in that case it will be a 2-star at the very least. But the reason for it is that it calls everything to the field except order cards, which means you're gonna call triggers, and that is not good. And then Soul Blast 2 is not worth it in my mind. If it was then Soul Blast 1, fine, but Soul Blast 2 makes this card basically unplayable in my opinion. So that's why it's gonna be a 1-star. Now, if we go up to grade 2s, we've got a very interesting generic card, which has the archetype name for Magnolia, as we have Sylvan Hornbeast Duger. And Duger has the ability, continues a Wriggles circle. If you have 4 more other rear guards, this unit gets power plus 5k. Now this is gonna be a 2-star card for me. Yes, it's a 15k attacker that can make 20 3k columns, which are pretty good numbers to make right now, but the issue is that its condition is super annoying, because it asks you to have an entire filled board, as it states 4 or more other rear guards. So it needs to be on the rear guard circle, and then you need to have 4 other rear guards, so that means you need to have 5 rear guards to even get the 5k power. I do not think that that's worth it to put so much resource into it to actually get that 5k power, as you open up yourself for control abilities, and then you can easily get burned by it just to gain the 5k power off it. Yes, it's nice, but there are definitely better ways to get this type of power on the board. So that's why it's going to be a 2-star. Now, another grade 2 within the same archetype naming scheme is Sylvan Horned Beast Aleo. And Aleo has the ability, act on Rigger Circle, cost, retire this unit, choose 2 of your units, and it gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. Now this is going to be a 3-star card for me. Yes, it looks a bit underwhelming as you lose a card to give 2 units 5k power, but in the current environment of Stoicheia, this is actually a very nice card because you can resurrect this card onto the field with the Alchemagic deck that has the whole resurrecting capabilities. But also in the Magnolia deck, giving 2 units 5k power can actually make a big difference as you have a lot of cards that are just below the magic threshold of hitting over a trigger, and that 5k power can definitely push them all above that first defensive trigger, so suddenly you can actually benefit way more from all your multi-attacking. So overall, I think it's a nice card. It can also be used in the early game if you want to make more magic numbers. So I think it's pretty decent for what it can provide, and therefore I think it's a solid 3-star card. Now for that, we have another grade 2, and this time a grade 2 from the starter deck, which is Looting Petal Stomalia. And Stomalia has the ability act on Rearguard Circle once a turn, cost counter +1 and soul +1, and until the end of turn, this unit gets boost and power plus 5k. Now, for me, this is yet again another 1-star card. Like, it's counter +1, soul +1 to gain 5k power. Yes, it gets boost, which is fine and all, but as I said, Magnolia probably is gonna attack with your back row unit, so the boost might or might not even come up. And then we have the resurrect capabilities with the Alchemagic Zolga build, and you're not gonna play this in that deck, so then Magnolia is the only one left, and then you're just using this to gain 5k power. Yeah, not great. Now, a grade 2 that is actually pretty useful is Spurring Maiden Elenia, and Elenia has the ability, auto, when this unit is placed on the Rearguard Circle from hand, cost, counter +1 and soul +1, choose a grade 2 or less card from your drop, call to the Rearguard Circle, and it gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. Now, this is going to be a 3-star card, and you might think to yourself, now hold on a moment, it has the exact same cost, it also gains 5k power, just like the previous grade 2, but that was a 1-star. Why is this a 3-star? Well, the reason is that this gives you a card while doing so. So you counter plus soul +1 to actually get 1 card, and you gain 5k to the board. That 1 card, in my opinion, is almost worth the counterblast and soul blast. And keep in mind, it calls it from the drop zone. So it's not just blindly drawing a card, you have choices to make, and you can actually make your own value when you resurrect a specific card to the field. So that's the reason why it's a 3-star card, because it's a card that resurrects cards from the drop zone, and that's always good because it means your drop zone becomes a toolbox, and that's a powerful asset to have. So that's why I think it's a solid 3-star card. Sure, it's a bit overcosted, but that's the reason why it's a 3-star card and not a 4 or 5-star. So it all is a matter of perspective. But again, don't play the other card, but you can play this one. Now, another unit that I think you shouldn't really be playing is this grade 3 Noble of Wisdom Edgar, which has the ability on a Rearguard Circle, when this unit attacks, cost counter +1, and this unit gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. It's a 1-star. Do I have to explain it once again? It's counterblast to gain power. That's not good, especially if it's only 5k power. If it at the very least was 50k power or something ridiculous like 15, 20 or 25, fine. But 5? Yeah, no. But luckily, those were all the generic support out of the way, so let's talk about some archetype-specific cards. And we're gonna start off with the starter deck archetype, which is the Magnolia variant, the Sylvan Horned Beast. So let's start off by looking at the grade 1 from the right line, which is Sylvan Horned Beast Charis. And Charis has the ability auto. When this unit is rode upon by Sylvan Horned Beast Lattice, you may reveal the top card of your deck. If it's a grade 2 or less unit card, call to the Rearguard Circle, and if it isn't, put it into your soul. And it also has the ability continuous back row Rearguard Circle. During the battle this unit attack, this unit gets power plus 5k. So first off, his first effect is a free +1 or a plus to the soul. Now overall, it's kind of awkward, this skill, because it can call you triggers, and that kind of sucks if you need to call triggers. But if you see grade 3, which is Magnolia, or a order card, you can just put it to the soul and you gain 1 soul, which is nice because a lot of cards will use soul. So it's a nice addition to it. It's a bit RNG, but at the very least, it's free. Now, its second ability is also pretty nice, because if it's on the back row, it can become a 13k attacker. Now, granted, you will see this in a moment here, the only way to activate this skill or to capitalize on this skill is with Magnolia himself, because that card allows you to attack with your back row units. Because this ability doesn't allow this unit to attack from the back row. It just means if it attacks from the back row, it gains that power. It doesn't say that it can. It relies on another card to do so. With that interaction, it becomes an 18k attacker, as Magnolia gives it another 5k. An 18k attacker for free, or to say for free, is actually pretty decent. And with it all in mind, I think it's a solid 4-star card. Yes, the right line ability leaves things to be desired, but at the very least it's free. And this potential soul application that you gain soul can actually help you a lot, as a lot of other very powerful cards use soul. So therefore, I think it's fine as a 4-star card. Now, to understand why I say that the soul aspect is very important, we're gonna go over to the grade 2 of the right line, as we have Sylvan Horned Beast Lattice. And Lattice has the ability, although when this unit is rode upon by Sylvan Horned Beast King Magnolia, cost Soul Blast 1. Reveal the top card of your deck. If it's a unit card, call it to the Rejection circle. If it isn't, put it into your hand. So again, this is another potential +1, only instead of going to the soul, if it's not a unit card, it adds it to your hand. Now this ability is fine, but again, it has the same issues as we've seen with the grade 1, as you can call triggers. And in this case, it costs you soul to even activate this ability, so it's not even free anymore, so you can't waste resources for calling a trigger to the field, which isn't great. But luckily, on top of that, we have another ability, which is auto and back row Rejection circle. When this unit attacks a Vanguard, costs Soul Blast 1, and this unit gets power plus 10k until the end of the battle. So where the grade 1 can become an 18k attacker with Magnolia, this can become a 25k attacker, as it can gain 10k and another 5k from Magnolia, which is a really good number, as it hits over defensive trigger. But with that in mind, it's gonna be a 3-star card for me, for the main reason that all these abilities cost soul. It costs you resources, which means you might not even be able to always capitalize on the extra power, and you need to waste resources to call the top card to the field, and that could be a trigger, thus wasting not only a trigger from your deck, but also soul from your resource pool. So it has some drawbacks, and therefore I can only give it 3 stars. And I've been throwing his name around with these last 2 cards, so let's actually talk about him. And we take a look at the new main grade 3, which is Sylvan Horned Beast King Magnolia. And Magnolia has the simple single ability, Auto and Vanguard Circle. At the end of the battle this unit attacked, cost counter plus 1. Choose one of your rear guards, and until the end of the turn, that unit can attack from the back row, and it gets power plus 5k. If you Persona Road this turn, choose 3 rearguards instead of 1. So this card allows us to multi-attack, and this card allows us to capitalize on that back row rearguard circle skill from Lattice, as well as the grade 1 Charis, which will give this deck always 4 attacks and potentially 6 attacks if you can Persona right. Now the interesting thing about this ability is that you aren't forced to give the plus 5k power to your back row, as you can just give 5k power to anywhere on the board, meaning you can empower your columns in the process without actually getting more attacks. And you might think to yourself, what is the point of doing that? Well, the thing is, this ability is at the end of the battle, so it's after your opponent already took the damage. So if they got a defensive trigger, you can look at your field and look at the power numbers on the board, and then calculate if it's worth it to give your entire back row the 5k power, as well as the chance to multi-attack from the back row, or just say power up an entire column and another side column with 1 for 5k and 1 for 10k to just add extra pressure onto the board, even through the midst of a defensive trigger. And that flexibility makes this a very strong card in any situation. However, even if that's the case, it's only going to be a 4-star, and the main reason why that's the case is just like the reason that I gave with the Cater Sanctuary grade 3 Hexa Orb Sorceress. Their powerful abilities are locked behind the Persona right condition, meaning it's not consistent, and with no searchers or no consistency engine in sight, it is very much plausible that you will never see this ability during multiple matches, which is kind of an issue. And at the same time, another thing that stands in Magnolia's way is the fact that it relies on you having a full board. So if you don't have the resources, or your opponent is just retiring your entire board or something else, if they have some control options, they can really hamper down your offensive options if you cannot repopulate the board with good enough cards. And then even if you could Persona right, you might not even be able to capitalize on the entire skill. So there are definitely some drawbacks here, and the main issue that I see is with the Persona Right clause and everything. But then again, it's still a very powerful card, but with the fact that you always have 4 attacks, and that's why I think it's a solid 4-star boss unit for the whole Sylvan Horn deck. But, of course, this isn't everything, because we have also a very powerful support card for Magnolia. So let's talk about this card, which has the nickname Care Bear, or whatever you want to call this thing. Because here we have Sylvan Hornbeast Gnosla. And Gnosla has the ability Auto Backward Rearguard Circle. When this unit attacks, cost counter +1, choose one of your other rearguards and it gets this unit's power until the end of turn. This unit basically can give its power to the next attack. And if you have multiple copies of this card onto the field, you can basically stack it onto the next one, and that can stack it onto the next one, and that can stack it onto the next one, thus accumulating more power and more power every single time that you pass it on. And this is also a card that really synergizes nicely with any other card that gives power, like the Mantis Grade 1, as well as the Sylvan Horn Grade 2 that retires itself to give 5k power. If you stack that power onto this unit, it can then pass it on to the next one, thus gaining even more value off of those specific units. And of course, triggers, over triggers, all that kind of jazz, you can just stack it onto this one and he will then pass it on to the next, thus basically doubling the value of those effects as well. So, with it in mind, and with the multi-attack potential of Magnolia, I think this is a solid 5-star card. Yes, it's not super flexible as you need to rely on Magnolia, but for the Magnolia deck, this thing carries it all. It's insane. But of course, Magnolia isn't the only archetype that we got for Stoicheia, so let's take a look at the second one, the more mysterious, as we have a very interesting new mechanic with the Alchemagic mechanic. And we started with the right line of this deck, and that starts with the Grade 1 Rancor Chain. And Rancor Chain has the ability, act on Vanguard Circle, once a turn, cost Soul Blast 1, draw 2 cards, choose 1 order card from your hand, discard it. If you did not discard, choose 2 cards from your hand and discard them. And it also has the ability, continues a Rearguard Circle. If you played an order this turn, this unit gets power plus 2k. So this second effect is the reason why the 10k booster is also kind of redundant, as this is also 10k booster within the archetype. But the main attraction is the first ability. This effect is insanely strong. Being able to draw 2 extra cards on your very first turn is kind of a big deal. And yes, you need to discard a card, but it's a Grand Blue aesthetic. This deck can resurrect cards from the drop zone. The drop zone is a toolbox, even for order cards. So that discard is no problem at all. And even in the case when you don't have an order card to discard, you discard 2 cards. And as soon as it's a Grand Blue deck, then saying Soul Blast 1 to mill 2 cards, even for Grand Blue, that's actually not that bad. To just mill 2 cards for a Soul Blast, and that Soul Blast is another card that goes to the drop zone. Sure, it's only your starter, but then again, it's an extra card in the drop zone. It isn't even a bad trade. So, even in the worst case scenario where you just need to mill 2 cards, it's still good. And keep in mind, you draw the cards, and then you select the cards from your hand to discard. So it's actually way better than just mindly milling cards from the top of your deck. So with that in mind, this card is for me an obvious 5-star card. That much draw potential in the early game, and you're able to set up your drop zone for the mid to late game in such an easy way is insanely good. And of course, you can easily just mulligan your hand for at least 1 order card, so you can get the advantage of this card. So for me, it's a very powerful card and an awesome setup card for a turn 1 play for this deck. But if we go up in the right line, we see the Grade 2, which is Black Tears Husk Dragon. And this card has the ability, auto, when this unit is placed on the Vanguard Circle, choose up to 1 normal order from your drop and put it into your hand. So where the Grade 1 of the right line needs to discard an order, this card can then grab that card back into your hand for free. So suddenly you gain the full advantage of the Soul Blast 1 draw 2 cards. Kind of nutty if you think about it. But then on top of it, it also has the ability to continue a Rearguard Circle. If you played an order this turn, this unit gets power plus 5k. So it becomes a 15k beater if you play an order, which you're probably going to do almost every single turn. So that's, again, a very nice card. For me, this is going to be a solid 3-star card. Like, it's not as versatile, impactful as the Grade 1 that we just talked about. And the 15k beater is nice, but keep in mind, this deck needs to be very picky with its rearguard units, as you don't have a lot of room to play with them, as you need to play a lot of order cards. And there is another beater in the deck that's kind of more useful than this card. So for me, it's gonna stay on 3-star, because if you put the 10k booster of the Grade 1 behind it, it's a 25k column. It doesn't really make a magic number. Whereas there's another card that actually will make a solid magic number. So that's why it's gonna stick at a 3-star rating. But if we go a bit beyond that, we see the new master of this deck, the new main Grade 3 Vanguard, as we have Mysterious Rain Spiritualist Zorga. And Zorga has a very interesting ability, as it has Continuous Vanguard Circle. When you would play a normal order, you can bind a normal order with a different card name from your drop and Alch Magic. Alch Magic is basically combine the cost and add the effects to the back. So basically what you do is you grab the ability of an order card in your drop zone and stick it onto the order card that you play from hand. You still only play one order card per turn, but that order card will have double the effects, but also double the cost. So keep that in mind when playing this card, how that works out. And one important thing to note here is that the ability of the order card that you play from hand will activate first, and then after that activation, you play the effect of the second order card. So you need to be very wary of that aspect, because it can definitely impact the value you're gonna get out of your order cards depending on which order you need to resolve them. But on top of that, it also has the ability act on Vanguard Circle. Once a turn, cost counter +1, choose a card from your drop zone and call to the Rearguard Circle. So not only can this card resurrect units from the drop zone, thus generating value over time and populating the board for just beaters, but it can also resurrect order cards from your drop zone so you can reactivate those effects. It's kind of ridiculous how much it turns the drop zone into a toolbox, because in the past you could only reuse units. Now with this card you can reuse order cards, and that also means that the order card quantity in your deck actually is double the value from what you are actually running, because you can play an order card from your hand, it goes to the drop, and then you can reactivate it from the drop again. So every order card can potentially count as 2 copies of itself, unless you mill them from your deck or something else. But besides that, it's kind of ridiculous. And for obvious reasons, this is going to be a solid 5-star card. Like, the fact that this turns your entire drop zone into a solid toolbox itself is already ridiculous enough. But this whole Alch Magic mechanic is incredibly powerful, and it scales incredibly well in the future. Every new normal order that they're gonna create for Stoicheia will benefit this playstyle. It will benefit Zorga and makes the deck even more powerful. So for that reason alone, it's a solid 5-star card. But even now, it's a very solid deck that is a bit tricky to play, is a bit tricky to build, but opens up for so much interesting build options and play decisions. So I stated before that the Grade 2 wasn't really that necessary as a beater, and the reason why that's the case is because this Grade 3 exists. Hydraulic Ram Dragon. This card has the simple effect, auto Rearguard Circle, when this unit attacks a Vanguard, if your bind zone has an order card, this unit gets power plus 5k until the end of that battle. So it's an 18k attacker that's almost active the entire game. Once you Alch Magic once, it's an 18k attacker. And this is the reason why it's much better than the Grade 2, because 18k plus the 10k of the Grade 1, it's 28k, thus making a way better magic number than the 15k Grade 2. So for me, it's going to be a solid 3-star card. Yes, the other Grade 2 was also a 3-star card, but it also has the right line ability. And beaters usually won't get a high rating because they're just beaters. They do one specific thing good, but they don't really do anything besides that. For the final support unit for Zorga, we have a very incredibly powerful Grade 2, as we have Inheritance Maiden Hendrina. And Hendrina has the effect, although when this unit is placed on the Rearguard Circle, you may discard 3 cards from the top of your deck. So this can mill you 3 cards, so it can set up your drop zone. But very important thing to note here is that it's not mandatory, it's optional. So if you don't need to mill more cards, then don't do it, because deck out can also become a thing, and at some point you much rather want to draw into your cards so that you can use them from your hand. But that is not the main thing that makes this card incredibly good. The main thing about this card is its second effect, which is act on Rearguard Circle. Cost, retire this unit, and until the end of turn, the next time you would play an order as Alch Magic, you do not have to pay all the Soul Blast from that cost. So this card turns all the Soul Blast costs into 0. This is incredibly powerful because a lot of the order cards require soul, And also, a lot of those order cards resurrect units. So the fact that you first need to activate this card and it retires itself, thus opening up the field for your resurrect abilities, and then making all those Soul Blast costs free, is insane. And this is yet again another card that scales nicely in the future, because every other normal order card that will be printed that has some type of Soul Blast cost can then be free or negated thanks to this unit. So yeah, this is yet again another 5-star card. Like, the future potential with this one is ridiculous, and even now it's a staple for the deck. This is incredibly useful to negate a lot of resource wasting or resource costs that is built into the deck itself. So very, very nice welcome. So it's a very nice welcome addition to the build. But now that we've seen all the unit cards, let's go over the order cards and see where the actual alchemagic power of Zorga lies. And we're going to start off with a simple grade 1 order card, which is Spiritual Body Condensation. And this order card's ability is play this with cost Soul Blast 1. Choose a card with grade equal or less than your Vanguard from your drop, call to the Wriggles circle, and it gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. So it's a simple resurrect ability for a Soul Blast, and it gains 5k power. Now overall, this is going to be a 4-star order card for me, because this is actually a very good order card. It replaces itself for a card with from your drop zone. So it's a 1-for-1 trade, but on top of that you pay a Soul Blast to gain 5k power, which is a decent trade in my opinion. And you can use this in the early game, which synergizes a little bit with your right line. And of course you can then use it in the mid to late game. And it's a Soul Blast cost, which can be negated with the grade 2 that we just talked about. So overall, a very nice card. And it's generic, so you can even apply this in any other archetype as well. You can even use it in Magnolia to repopulate the board with your Gnosis that gets retired, as that's your most important card, if you have the soul to facilitate that, of course. Now the next normal order card that we've got is Grief, Despair, and Rejection. And this has the ability, play this with cost, counterblast 1. If your Vanguard is Mysterious Rain Spiritualist Zorga, choose 3 of your units and they get power plus 10k until the end of turn. Now this is going to be for me a solid 3-star card. It's basically a front trigger to the front row, but it can only work with Zorga. What this basically is, it's the on-attack skill of Nirvana, but then in an order card for Zorga. And Nirvana can only give it to the front row units with the overdress ability. This just give it to all the units, but it's an order card, so it's a bit less consistent than Nirvana. It's an interesting dynamic, and it's a nice card. We see the power behind Nirvana, and definitely the power is here for Zorga as well. So it's going to be a 3-star card for me, as it's nice. It's a nice addition. It's at the very least a counterblast power skill that actually gives you a lot of power and spreads it over multiple units, thus generating way more value than just one measly power pump of counterblast plus 5k. Now the second grade 3 order card that we've got is the Cursed Soul Wriggles in Agony, and this has the ability, play this with cost Soul Blast 2. Look at 4 cards from the top of your deck, choose up to 1 unit card from among them, call to the Wriggles circle, and discard the rest. If it is on Alchemagic, call to 2 cards to the Wriggles circle instead of 1, and all units called with this order gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. Now this is going to be for me a 2-star card. Now the thing about this order card is that for Soul Blast 2 and a discard, you can get 1 card from the top of your deck, which is bad value. It's not good. And if you use this in combination with Alchemagic, so it can either be the one that you bind from Dropzone or you play it from your hand and then you activate Alchemagic, doesn't really matter here. Then you get 2 cards for Soul Blast 2 and discard, and you give them 5k power. In that sense, maybe it's worth it. Maybe. And of course, you have the grade 2 that can negate the Soul Blast, and then you could say it's definitely worth it. And to some extent, yes. But then we get in this situation where we can actually see why this order card has some downsides. In the Alchemagic deck, you're gonna run 16 triggers, which are 16 cards from your main deck. But you're also gonna run about 10, 12, 13 order cards to make the deck as consistent as possible with all the orders. So that's about 26 to 30 cards that are not orders, which is more than half. And you also have the cards from your right lines out of the equation, so then suddenly you have 30 cards from 46. That's not good. That means that about 15 to 20 cards in your deck are actually targets that you want to hit with this ability, which isn't that high of a chance to actually hit the targets that you want. So in that retrospect, this is a high roll card that you hope to hit the targets that you need to actually get value off it. So that's the reason why I can only give this card 2 stars. On paper, when you think about what it can give you, it sounds very good, but in context with the whole Alchemagic deck, it's kind of a big high roll card that you hope to get value of it. Granted, if you combine this with the Great One Order card that resurrects just one card and you negate the Soul Blast cost, basically it can give you 3 units onto the board, which can be good depending on what the scenario you have. So I think it's a tech choice, but it's definitely not a mainstay in the deck right now. Maybe in a non-Alchemagic deck it can actually see some play, but we have to wait and see how that play out. But then again, it's kind of iffy. And then for the final normal order card, we have a grade 2 normal order, which is Tearing Malice, with the ability, play this with cost, retire 2 rearguards, draw a card, put this card into your soul, and count charge 1. So it's basically a resource engine. You gain a soul, you gain a counterblast, you draw a card, but you need to sacrifice this order card, and you need to retire 2 rearguards. Now, if you combine this with Alchemagic, then it's not really that you lose this card because you bind it from the drop zone, so then the draw is actually more value. Yes, you retire 2 rearguards, but in a clan or in a deck that resurrects a lot of cards to the board, at some point your board is filled with units, and you cannot really gain more advantage with a filled board. This order card at least allows you to gain advantage by removing those units, gain resources, and then repopulate the board with maybe units with on-place effects or better units in the process. So it's an interesting card that can actually see some value depending on how the game goes, depending on how you build your deck, because this definitely has more advantage in a deck with a lot of on-place effects that then can resurrect them from the board. And I think it's a solid 3-star card that opens up a lot of play. Now, also interesting thing about this order card is that you need to put it into the soul, but if this is the card that you bind with Alchemagic from your drop zone, you put the order card that you play from hand. If we ever get cards that need to Soul Blast grade 3s for effect, as we just seen, we have grade 3 order cards. This order card then allows you to put those grade 3s into the soul. Currently, there is no real application for that, but that's something that can come up in the future. So that's something that I suggest to keep in the back of your head. Now, of course, normal orders aren't the only type of orders that Stoicheia got, because they also got a couple of blitz orders. And first off, let's talk about the generic blitz order from the starter deck, which is Call to the Beast. And Call to the Beast is the blitz order with the effect, choose one of your units and it gets power plus 5k until the end of the battle. If you have 3 or more back row rearguards, it gets power plus 15k instead of plus 5. Now, for me, this is going to be a solid 3-star card. Like, it has the same issue as the Cater Sanctuary one, where you need to have multiple units onto the field to gain the value. In this case, you need to have 3 rearguards instead of 3 units, so it's even more susceptible for control. But at the same time, it is the most flexible one of those 15k shields, because there is an instance where you can just use it as a 5k shield instead of all for nothing for the 15k. You have stages to it, which is a bit more flexible. So I think that negates the bigger issue of having more rearguards onto the field. So therefore, I think it's a solid 3-star card. Maybe 4-star, but I think that's stretching it quite a bit. Now, another blitz order they got was a grade 2 Sealed Road, which has the ability, play this with cost, counterblast 2, choose one of your opponent's Vanguard, and this unit gets critical -1 until the end of battle. Now, for me, this is going to be a 2-star card, but there is definitely value to be had here. The issue of this card is that it costs counterblast 2, which is a lot of resources. However, decreasing your opponent's critical with 1 can actually save you a lot, as most units will attack with 1 critical. Yes, it's a Vanguard attack, so they can rip a crit, which then puts them back at 1, but that still translates that this card reads counterblast 2, heal 1 card. If you have a unit with the ability counterblast 2 to heal a card, that's to some extent actually pretty playable and nice to have. That's what this order card basically translates to. And in some case, not only does it heal you, but it can save you a lot of guard from hand depending on how strong the Vanguard attacks is, because they can have like 90k power, but still with 1 critical, means if you reduce that 1 critical, it's still 0 damage. So currently it's kind of iffy with the 2 counterblast, but I can see there's at least some potential, and therefore I wanted to at least give a 2-star card. Now finally, we have one more blitz order, which is Ghost Chase, and Ghost Chase has the effect, choose one of your units and it gets power plus 5k until the end of the battle, choose one of your rearguards that is not being attacked and return it to your hand. This is an obvious 5-star card. Like, this is ridiculous. It's a blitz order that's 5k shield, so it's the same shield value as a grade 1 or grade 2, so you don't lose out on shield value of just running this blitz order in the first place, and it has no condition to meet that 5k. But on top of that, it has an extra application, which is actually really good because you can bounce back a unit and then immediately guard with that unit. So if you needed to call a trigger unit in the field with all our random top deck calling that we have in Stoicheia that we all discussed in this video, we can bounce back those cards back into our hand and immediately guard with it. Or we can call down perfect guards to be a bit more aggressive during our turn and then bounce them back to our hand so we can perfect guard for during our opponent's turn. It allows us to be way more flexible in the whole process. And it doesn't need anything extra to even get this. This feels like a pseudo G-Guardian to some extent for anybody that's played during the G-Guard, during the G era. Like, it's a shield unit that has extra applications which can actually propel our game plan, because we can also bounce back units with unplace effects, like the Grade 1 Mantis that unplays 5k power. You can place it, give 5k power, next turn, guard with this, bounce back to hand, and then the following turn place it again to give again 5k power to the board. This card is very flexible, and I hope that future Blitz orders will follow suit, as these are the things that I like to see. This will definitely promote more defensive power creep or defensive creep that can also propel our game plan and make for more interesting dynamic gameplay. And it's something, as a Jira player, I look forward to even see one more card like this. So yeah, definitely a 5-star card. And that basically concludes the entire set review for Stoicheia. There is a lot that we went over. Like, Stoicheia is a very interesting nation, as we have the whole multi-tech shenanigans with Magnolia, with the Sylvan Horn Beast. But on top of that, we've got the whole Zorga Alchemagic mechanic with all these normal orders that we can utilize from the drop zone, and of course they have the drop zone mechanic itself from Grand Blue, which makes a very unique deck, and together makes a very unique nation. So there were a lot of details that we needed to go over and to analyze, as it isn't something generically as Dragon Empire where most cards or most builds do something similar, as they retire a lot of stuff or they just power up a little bit. So that makes this a very interesting nation to take a look at, and I'm very curious of future support for Stoicheia, as there are still a lot of things that we haven't even delved into, like the Mega Colony aspect, or we have hardly seen an Aqua Force card. So I'm very curious what they will do for this particular nation. But with that all said, let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of this support. Are you excited for Zoga? Are you excited for the Alchemagic deck? Or are you more favored for the whole Magnolia multi-tech strategy that we've seen in the starter deck with the new extra support in this particular set? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments section down below. As always, this video has been brought to you by lovely Patreons over patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a Patreon today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one!